It really is a shame, but if second-year running back Kendre Miller doesn't get back out on the field quickly, he might lose his job. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your friend, your host, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst over at WWL TV. We appreciate you very much for being here on today's episode. And on today's show, we're going to be diving in to the position battles as they continue on the offensive line at safety and still at wide receiver. We're going to take a look at how the run game is evolving for this New Orleans Saints team. I don't just mean from last year to this year. We know that, but how it's evolved so far over the course of training camp. And we're going to lead everything off with our kickoff today, how things are getting tough for Kendre Miller and really the rest of the running back room, but especially Kendre as he continues to deal with that hamstring injury. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. All right, so here's what we know. Kendre Miller has not participated in a single practice so far through training camp with the exception of individual drills on day one. And because of that, it's going to be very, very hard for him to keep his job as a New Orleans Saints running back. And not only as a New Orleans Saints running back, but as a New Orleans Saints running back that was set to contribute big time here in 2024. I know the outside run game wasn't a big part of his game during his time at TCU, but he seemed to be kind of grasping it okay, coming along slowly, but getting it. And so that would have put him in a great position, probably between Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, to contribute as a guy that's got great vision, good burst, good hands, good speed, all these things, and good vision. I think I said that already. But you have all of these positive attributes that would have been great in this new Clint Kubiak wide zone influenced or Shanahan influenced wide zone offensive scheme and haven't been able to get out on the practice field. And it's tough, as Dennis Allen said, I think maybe the third or fourth day of practice, it's really, really tough to win a job from the training room or from the weight room. And that's kind of where we've seen Kendre Miller so far, with the exception of during his time toward the end of the West Coast practices down in Irvine, California. We saw him working off to the side a little bit. And no, that was pretty sporadic. Now, that's not to say that he's not working, right? He's just working where we don't see him as media, which makes perfect sense. But not being out on the practice field, not being able to participate in the preseason games so far, those are the things that are going to be detrimental to the opportunity that sits in front of him. Now, I don't think that the New Orleans Saints flat out cut him. I mean, this is an organization that's proven over and over again that they're willing to be very patient, especially with their draft picks. But for a guy like Kendre Miller, he's not carrying around a first-round draft pick tag. He's carrying around a third-round draft pick tag, and sometimes third-round draft picks don't make teams. That's just the reality of it. And that's not a bust. That's not any of those things. Sometimes third-round picks don't make teams. In fact, a lot of times, third-round picks don't make teams. And so Kendre Miller, who has this unique opportunity in front of him to be a third-round pick that would have otherwise been a lock on this roster, now all of a sudden his future hangs in limbo. Now, as I was saying, I don't think that the New Orleans Saints just flat out cut him. I don't think that they'll do that. They've proven to be patient, and he deserves the opportunity once he's healthy. The question is, can he get healthy? And is there anything else that's going on that's kind of led to the very visible frustration that the New Orleans Saints organization, head coach Dennis Allen, has shared around Miller? Is he slow coming on to that new playbook? Is that new outside zone scheme not working for him the way that we were hoping that maybe, or the way that they were hoping that maybe it would, or that we were hoping to see that it would for them? Maybe that's the case. And then this injury just kind of compounds on top of that. We don't know, right? We don't know what happens in those walls when we're not there. Okay. So there could be a compounding issue here where the injury is just kind of the tip of the iceberg in a way. We'll find out. Here's what I think that the Saints should do. If Kendre Miller is not able to get back out and fully participate in practice this week and not play in the preseason game with the Tennessee Titans. That's kind of his last chance, obviously his last chance here over the course of the offseason. But I don't know that you could just carry him on the roster in 2024 and sacrifice what else you have in that running back room. Guys like Jordan Mims and James Robinson making big impressions behind guys like Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. Jacob Kibodi, his play is getting bigger and bigger and bigger here throughout camp. Does he all of a sudden have a big kind of burst onto the scene here towards the end of the preseason? I think Mims and Robinson are more kind of already solidified within the conversation, but do you give up what you have for those guys in the hopes that Kendre Miller is going to be ready to go week 1 and stay healthy throughout the season, and hope that you can hold on to Mims and or Robinson on your practice squad? That might be a little bit of a tough ask for an organization that's about to predicate its entire new offense on that very run game. This is one of the other reasons why this is kind of tough sledding for these guys, and for a guy like Kendre Miller in particular, is because this isn't just your average, run-of-the-mill run game. There's no such thing as your average run-of-the-mill off game or run game, but you know what I mean? It's not just a part of your offense. It's the lifeblood of your offense outside of your offensive line. So here's what I think the New Orleans Saints should consider doing if they're able to. At roster cuts now, you can put 2 players on injured reserve without having to carry them over to your 53-man roster. Kendre Miller should be one of those players. Put him on injured reserve, give him 4 weeks at the beginning of the regular season to recover, open his 3-week practice window, and then see how things go, and then you can make a larger decision at that point. If all of a sudden he has missed all of training camp, the first 4 weeks of the season, and goes through 3 weeks of practices, and he's still not ready, then you can make a bigger decision and say goodbye, part ways. But if you run into a situation here to where you're able to give him that time, right? You got Jordan Mims, you've got James Robinson that you can add to this roster behind Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. And Jamal Williams, by the way, has looked great in this system so far, of no surprise to anybody that's been paying attention to this show. That gives you the opportunity to have the flexibility at the position. What if you get into the regular season and things are going great with Alvin Kamara, they're going fine with Jamal Williams, but they're going poorly with the third running back? Okay, well, now you have reinforcements coming after that 4th week to potentially get Kendre Miller back out there. I think Kendre Miller, because of how talented he is, right? I can sit here and rail on this idea that he hasn't been a part of training camp and all this stuff, and hold him accountable for his injuries and not being able to stay healthy and all these other things. We can do that all day if we want to. But the fact of the matter is, he's a talented player, really talented player. We saw it last year against the Atlanta Falcons as the Saints closed out the season, 75 rushing yards, and then ended up getting into the end zone, contributing in the passing game, all that stuff. We've seen it. We synced it. The only issue is, can he be out on the field? So now this gives you the opportunity, if you put him on injured reserve on the day of roster cuts, that way he only misses the first 4 games, you're not ending his season, then you at least give him the opportunity to say, okay, I'm good. Let me prove something. And with everything that the New Orleans Saints have said over the course of this offseason in terms of the culture that they want, what they want within their building, all these other things, they want guys who want it. It's of Kendre Miller's best interest to prove that he wants it, and that would at least give him the opportunity to do that. That's the way I think the New Orleans Saints may need to handle this situation. But ideally, we walk out there later on today and Kendre Miller's back on that practice field and he's performing in the preseason game against the Tennessee Titans this weekend. I just don't know if we can rely on that at this point. All right, coming up next, let's discuss how the run game has evolved so far just over the course of training camp, because the fact of the matter is that it's changed a lot. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. You hear me talk about them all the time. It's because we love them. I absolutely love FanDuel. There's so much going on. The MLB season continues. The NFL season approaches. There's also the NFL preseason, of course. If you're somebody like me and you love sort of the chaos of the preseason and want to get in on the action a bit, you can find everything you're looking for over at FanDuel right now. And right now is the right time to head to FanDuel, because right now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube or YouTube TV. Then, with your YouTube TV standard base plan, you'll be able to watch regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market games for the first 3 weeks of the season. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and then you can cancel any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started and download America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints rushing attack has evolved quite a bit here over the course of training camp. So I want to do my best to lay it out for you. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you go and check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Vinny Iyer, Michelle Majuk, giving you all the info that you need every single Monday through Friday to become the smartest fantasy football player in your fantasy football league. Go and check them out today. Locked On Fantasy Football, available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I've noticed some changes in the New Orleans Saints run game, and I want to be really clear when I talk about changes. I'm not really talking about from 2023 to 2024. We know the changes that are a part of that. The Saints are running a lot more outside of the tackles. They're utilizing a lot more play action, which is incorporated into their runs as well. A play fake to one potential rusher and then a handoff to another potential rusher, or a play fake to one potential rusher and a pitch to another potential rusher, all these other things. They've also incorporated a lot of different snap exchanges or mesh point exchanges. So instead of your standard handoff, right, snap, turn, handoff, there's also the handoffs for the stretch run, to where the quarterback has extended their arm fully to get the running back on the right, what they call track within the outside zone runs. We've seen tosses, we've seen pitches, we've seen jet sweep, quick turnarounds. We've seen shovel passes, which are technically passes. They're not really handoffs, but they're still kind of these little exchanges that happen in the backfield. You get what I'm saying. So they've incorporated all that. That's a little bit different from what they did last year. But what's been really impressive to me is watching the run game evolve over the course of training camp. So when I talk about it evolving, what I mean is how it's built upon, right? Started off at one place, then it got a little bit better, little extra wrinkle. Then a little extra wrinkle, then a little extra wrinkle, then a little extra wrinkle, so on and so forth. And over the course of training camp in the preseason, because of all of those little extra pieces, it's become more and more effective as well. The first 2 days of New Orleans Saints training camp out in Irvine, California, were almost specifically dedicated to the run game when it came to team drills and things like that. Of course, some passes intermingled within all of that, but it was a very run-focused couple of days. And that was on purpose, right? The run game is what sets up the rest of this offense. It's what predicates and defines the wide zone part of the offense is the zone run game. And so when we were watching that, it was, pretty basic, right? It was a lot of, turn around, hand off, run up the middle, turn around, hand off, run to the right, turn around, hand off, run to the left, and not really anything kind of being added to it, not really any ornamentation, not really much even working for them, to be honest, during those first couple of days. Then you saw things really pick up once they started to add the play action game and all this other stuff. But then also, beyond just the passing game settling in and therefore the run game being able to benefit from that, we just really saw this run game continue to evolve. So on a play, and so here's a little bit of an explanation. On a play where Derek Carr would typically snap the football and then turn around and hand off on a stretch run to the left or to the right to, let's say, Alvin Kamara, that was pretty basic in terms of the foundation of how that's done over the course of the first couple of practices. Then they started to mix in the play action. And so with that, you saw them actually during individual drills, quarterbacks would take a snap, actually hand the football off to a running back, but then bootleg around as if they didn't have a new football thrown to them, and then they would execute a throw. So then when they started doing those stretch zone runs, even when they actually did the handoff, they would go through the boot action or the boot action. That way it kind of might draw some of the eyes of the defense. We talk about eye discipline all the time as something the New Orleans Saints defense was struggling with a few years ago. These are the types of things that challenge eye discipline in the run game. I think we think about eye discipline a lot as just like motion and in the passing game. Because something flash that takes your attention as a defender to one side, which then opens up a passing lane or a target over on the other side, where really like the eye discipline thing impacts the entire game as a whole. If somebody's supposed to be filling a specific run fit, but then on that stretch run where the ball is indeed handed off, the linebacker is peeking over at the quarterback who looks like he's doing a boot action rollout, and all of a sudden, oh, he might have the football. Then that gives an opportunity for that running back to get past you while you're distracted as a linebacker looking back at that quarterback, things like that. So challenging that eye discipline is done in a lot of different ways. And it happens sometimes not just before the ball is exchanged, whether via pass or run, but sometimes it's done after the ball is exchanged, like in that example. Okay, now let's build off of that, right? So then you go from that stretch run, having a little bit of what I would call like, it's almost like a follow through, right? Like in a basketball, like in a jump shot, you got to follow through. That play action motion, even though you've actually handed the ball off as a quarterback, is a little bit of that follow through. Okay, now let's build off of that. So then all of a sudden, you also saw situations where you had a wide receiver run an orbit motion or a wide motion that goes behind the quarterback. And as that motion is going on, the quarterback will snap the football, maybe fake the stretch run to the left, and then pitch to the orbit motion on an end around that's coming around to the opposite side of the field, or vice versa. Sometimes you saw a fake pitch and then an exchange in another way, certain things like that. So there's a lot of different things that you're able to incorporate there. And then maybe you don't necessarily get a fake pitch, right? But then you run that orbit motion around, and all of a sudden, that's another thing that challenges the eye discipline, where otherwise you snap the football and then you're just running your stretch run. And then all of a sudden, there's this end around motion from a wide receiver running in the backfield that you have to pay attention to as a defender. There's the potential for the stretch run handoff. And then the quarterback follows through with the boot action. That's three different things that linebacker has to look at and go, okay, who has the football? Then you start introducing things like jet sweeps, right? So a jet sweep is different from an end around in that an end around will come from one side of the field going around, right? There's the around part, the quarterback to the opposite side of the field. Jet sweep typically starts as a motion for a wide receiver from one side of the field running directly behind the line of scrimmage, right? Coming pretty close to the offensive line or between the offensive line and the quarterback, things like that. So then they'll add that jet sweep motion. And we saw a little bit of this in our film analysis and film breakdown, which you can read about over at LouisianaSports.net. Or if you want to see it, you can join the Locked On Saints Insider program. It's in our Insider Drive there. You can join with the link in the description. But basically, the jet sweep motion sometimes will actively capture the eyes of second-level players who are worried that the quarterback is going to snap the football and then just turn around and hand it off to the jet sweep guy that's running right behind them in that motion. But if the quarterback doesn't do that, instead, that quarterback can then turn around and either run a stretch run to the opposite side of where that jet sweep motion is going, and then bootleg out of that handoff just to give you another thing to have to pay attention to. Because the other reality is that not only could the quarterback turn around and hand it off to that player that's running that jet sweep motion, but they could fake it there, hand off the stretch run. Or they could fake it there, do a play action boot off of the stretch run, and then throw it to the guy that just ran that jet sweep motion, and then potentially even catch him on a real wheel route upfield if they wanted to. All of these other things. So you see what I mean? To where there's just all of this ornamentation that has just been built on and built on and built on. And I talked about Andrew Janocko, particularly the quarterback coach, and I think this goes for a lot of guys. Speaking with Derek Foster, the running backs coach, speaking with Andrew Janocko, speaking with Clint Kubiak, all these guys have a specific way of teaching to where everything is laid brick by brick by brick by brick. It's scaffolding is what we talk about when we look at it from a teaching perspective. You lay down a fundamental idea and then you build on top of that. And then once you've got that established, then you build on top of that. Once that's established, you build on top of that, so on and so forth. And that's what the New Orleans Saints have done to help to evolve their run game. And I promise you what I mentioned were just the obvious things. There are other things that this team is doing that makes their running game even more kind of exotic and unique in terms of how it challenges opposing defenses. Now all they have to do is get the execution right, and then we'll get a real opportunity to see it week 1 against the Carolina Panthers. All right, coming up next, let's update on the battles that are continuing on the offensive line, safety, and wide receiver, because once again, the distance just is not being created the way that you would expect it would. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today because it's the best place to get last-minute tickets if you're like me and you like to plan moments in advance rather than months in advance. If you're a spontaneous person and want to be rewarded for it, well, that's what Game Time helps with. A lot of folks end up actually saving money because tickets on Game Time typically get cheaper once things get closer to the actual start time of the event. They've got zone deals, they got flash deals. My favorite thing is you can toggle on all-in pricing. That way there's no surprise feeds by the end. It'll tell you $9 a ticket. You pay 18 when you're all said and done. No mystery when it comes to those fees. I love that. That's why I always make sure that all-in pricing is on my Game Time app. And you should go and download the Game Time app today so you can take all the guesswork out of buying your tickets. Download Game Time today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are still looking for folks to stand up and earn a couple of these position battles. And I don't know if the separation is what they expected it to be at this point. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here for another episode of Locked On Saints. We'll be live a little bit later on today. It'll be kind of later in the evening, giving you a recap of what went on in practice day 20 today. New Orleans Saints back at their facility, ready to sweat. I can't wait to be outside, outside in this New Orleans heat. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. So we'll be live later on, and then we'll have a fresh episode for you again tomorrow morning before Thursday's practice, also at the New Orleans Saints facility. Don't forget, the Saints will practice at 1 p.m. Central Time in the Superdome on Friday. Tickets are still available. You can head over to louisianasports.net for details on how to grab those tickets if you'd like to be in attendance. And of course, if you are, please say hi. Lots of folks said hi over at Ullman Stadium last night. I really appreciated that. I love that. It always means the world to me. Makes me a little misty every time that somebody does. All right, so look, I don't know if the New Orleans Saints wanted their position battles to be further along when it comes to the offensive line, safety, and wide receiver, but so far they are not. Or at least it doesn't look like it, right? Like the Saints just started incorporating, for instance, on their offensive line battle, Oli Udoh, when it comes to the right tackle battle. It was the first time in all of training camp that we haven't seen Trevor Penning take snaps at right tackle with the first team in practice, right? We've seen it in terms of a rotation of who's playing in the second team, Landon Young, Oli Udoh for a little while until he had his injury, Justin Herron, so on and so forth. But Jesse Davis. But for the most part, we've seen Trevor Penning there with the first team. So it wasn't really until just last night at Ullman Stadium that we really started to see Oli Udoh get the opportunity to start going in there. He was my dark horse pick to actually start at right tackle for this year because typically position changes don't work for struggling players. And so it wasn't the most advantageous thing, I think, for Trevor Penning to be moving over positions. But hey, he showed some improvement in that second preseason game against the San Francisco 49ers. And I know that it was against second team guys, but hey, he struggled against second team guys against Arizona. So he went from struggling against second team guys to not struggling as much against second team guys. Slight improvement. You'll take that. And you want to see all that because Trevor Penning works his butt off, as I've mentioned so far or before on the show. It's not like he's out there just, to borrow from Dennis Allen, lollygagging off on the side. This guy is getting stuff done. He's working. He's putting in the work, all this other stuff. So it's good to see some steps towards the improvement. But the Saints just now incorporating new players at right tackle, I don't know what that indicates. Does that indicate that they're comfortable with Trevor Penning all of a sudden? And so therefore they just want to get looks at other guys? Sometimes that happens, right? Okay, we've got everything that we need for this player. So now let's get these other players in there, get them some more reps against, first team defensive talent, all these other things. That's not out of the ordinary, but it would be a little late to kind of be like, you know what? We should try Oli Udoh there and with the first team and see what he can do. So it just depends upon what kind of the intent of the move is. But Dennis Allen is consistent in that he believes that the competition is still there at right tackle, even though those guys weren't necessarily moving in Landon Young and Oli Udoh into first team right tackle reps. He still believed that the competition was still going on. So maybe they've seen some things from Oli Udoh, and I did ask what it is that they liked from him. Length, size, the typical things that you like from an offensive lineman. And so we'll see where things go there, but it's going to be very interesting to track that for the rest of the week. Do we start seeing Oli Udoh move more into first team offensive reps at right tackle? Because it could be telling about where things are traveling or heading for Trevor Penning. But in what direction is going to be the tougher thing to figure out. Left guard still feels like a spot that's up for grabs. Lucas Patrick, I think, deserves that spot. I think he's looked pretty solid and pretty stout there. It's when he's moved into center that things haven't gone so well for him. But over at left guard, I think he brings a lot of energy. He brings veteran experience, all that. We were just talking about one of the situations earlier on in the show with Kendre Miller, a second-year guy who hasn't participated in a single training camp practice outside of individual drills for the first day. Nick Saldiveri's story is not much different. He has not participated in the majority of reps or days over at Saints training camp. And we haven't seen him make any progress outwardly in terms of what we, the media, can see in terms of working off to the side, things like that. We've seen him present every now and then, but never really working off to the side. And so Nick Saldiveri, a guy that I thought was a shoo-in to win that left guard role, the Saints traded all the way up to the first pick of day 3 in the 2023 draft to go and get him. They clearly loved him, but hasn't panned out so far, and he hasn't been able to get out there to win. And that, or to compete. And that stinks, if I'm being honest. I mean, he dealt with that shoulder injury all last year. I saw him over the summer at the, or rather over the offseason at one of the girls' high school flag football games over at Willow. And he was talking about how good he felt, how excited he was to be out there for training camp. Then he comes out and he has his calf injury, and then all of a sudden he's gone. Like him and Kendre Miller still kind of in the same boat. Like both those guys were excited to be out there. And then now all of a sudden they're dealing with these injuries. And the questions that are being asked are, what are you going to do to stay healthy? Right? Like that stinks, man. Like that's a tough position to be in as a player. And so a guy like Lucas Patrick competing over at left guard makes a ton of sense. Landon Young can compete at left guard as well. We could also see Kyle Hergel jump in there, the undrafted free agent rookie who's looked really good through the first 2 preseason games. He's played a lot of reps and hasn't allowed a single pressure so far. Graded highly, all those other things, if you believe in PFF grades. It's all there for Kyle Hergel. And then on top of that, you've also got a guy like Oli Udoh that can also play on the interior as well, but I think his game is strongest over at right tackle. So I'm actually glad he's getting some of those tackle reps. Or his game is strongest at tackle, so I'm glad he's getting the right tackle reps. So Dennis Allen saying last night that really there's only 2 positions that are solidified. Center with Eric McCoy, and then right guard with Cesar Ruiz. That's it. Those are 2 that are solidified. And then they feel pretty comfortable that a guy like Taliesin Fuang is going to be able to be just fine for them over at left tackle. They're very confident in that. But even that doesn't sound like it's quote unquote solidified, although it's totally solidified. You just, as a coach, don't want to let the rookie know, hey, you won the role. I get it. I understand that. It makes perfect sense. But of course, if nobody claims the right tackle role and you feel like you've got a better option at left tackle than right tackle at that point in terms of going to your plan B, then you might need to move Taliesin Fuang back over to right tackle. Although I do think that does more harm than good for a rookie to bounce around positions like that. So not ideal. Not ideal if that were to happen. So that's where the offensive line is. Safety. Yesterday, next to Tyrann Mathieu, we saw Johnathan Abram, Jordan Howden, Will Harris, and JT Gray all get snaps next to Tyrann Mathieu. Jordan Howden, of course, is getting a lot of flack right now, and I get it because he missed that tackle on the goal line against Joshua Dobbs. But look, this is what we've always talked about when it comes to Jordan Howden, is that he's learning how to be a box safety. He's not a line of scrimmage guy. He's a deep safety, right? He's a Tyrann Mathieu role, right? In terms of playing 60+% of the snaps in the middle of the field. That's what they really like about Jordan Howden. They're trying to teach him how to be a box safety. It's one of the reasons why I said, I think that this is Johnathan Abram's role, because Johnathan Abram already knows the role. Johnathan Abram and Tyrann Mathieu excelled next to each other to close out the season last year against mediocre teams, but still, it was the communication, all the things that were independent of what the opponent is doing. They excelled there. And then now you add in Will Harris, who's got a lot of versatility, a lot of athleticism, and a lot of experience. And that experience coming from a system that's very much like yours, because Aaron Glenn and Dan Campbell are over there in Detroit where Will Harris was. He was running a very similar system to what Dennis Allen is doing here. So he fits in perfectly. So guys are going to continue to get opportunities here because I don't feel like anybody is really separated. And in wide receiver, particularly the wide receiver 5 spot, you feel good about Chris Olave, Rashid, Shaheed, Cedric Wilson, A.T. Perry, but who's your 5th guy? Tough. I thought it might have been Kevin Austin Jr. by the time it was all said and done, but then he had a rough practice yesterday, including dropping a pass that ended up turning into an interception to end that 2-minute drive for Spencer Rattler. And then didn't have a strong preseason showing against San Francisco either. So it's unfortunate because we've seen him make some great plays over the course of training camp. So he's got a little bit of a rebound to do. Bub Means coming along, caught a touchdown from Derek Carr in last night's practice at Ullman. Caught another nice pass as well over the middle of the field from Jake Haener running a post route. He's got the rookie edge, the drafted rookie edge on top of all that. And then guys like Mason Tipton, unfortunately, like he's in that category now of players that, were trending up and then had the injury and then now is going to be kind of floundering for a spot potentially and is now looking more like a practice squad guy than a roster guy, in which it looked like he could have hit the roster. Unless he's able to come back from injury quickly and then be able to get back out there and show what he can do. But that might be a little bit unreasonable at this point. So that's the way that I look at each of these sort of position battles. That they're still actively engaged at the moment. And I don't know how the New Orleans Saints should feel about that, if I'm being honest with you. So we'll see how things go here over the course of next week. Players coming back from injury could make a big difference here as these battles continue on. All right, y'all. Appreciate you very much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go check out Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Pelicans with Jake Madison, as well as Matt Moscona over at Locked On LSU. We appreciate you very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.